All right, welcome back to Dad's Guide to Thrive, where we are having real chats with real dads about what are some struggles we face, what are some challenges we overcome, and what do we need in our lives to be our best for ourselves, for our kids, for our partners, for our life. So today I'm joined by Thomas Sanders-Corridan, and I am super excited because Thomas has got the most colourful background and story of where he's worked and where he's lived and the various experiences he's brought to bear as part of his now role as a dad. He's a slightly older father in his late 50s with a young child who's almost 6, and he's no longer with his son's mum. So he's gone through quite a bit when it gets to where we are to date as far as, co-parenting from separate households, working with needs and benefit and of the child and working with all the rest of it. So I'm not going to do any more of a mashup of this preamble. I'm just going to get straight into the conversation. Welcome to the chat, Thomas, and thank you so much for joining me.
Israel, my pleasure. I'm delighted to be here. This is it's quite an exciting topic for me.
Great. So give us a bit of a snapshot of whereabouts you are in life right now with work, with your son, with the family dynamic. What's at play at the moment?
Interestingly, I'll try and give you the probably the most accurate run up is the last 6 years. In the last 6 years, and I maybe not mentioned this in the notes I sent you, but I wrote a book, wrote and published a book on Amazon. Whilst my son was gestating in mum, and I managed to get that out when he was about 3 or 4 months old. It was quite an epic thing. But the book went out there, and that was the start of my journey to get me to where I wanted to be today, which was as a fully functioning business consultant. You kindly mentioned the colourful life. That colourful life has been in business. So I am not one of those people that's read someone else's book, been to multiple seminars and has come away evangelized into being a business consultant or any other consultant. T-shirt, poster, laptop, LP, tattoo, whatever I've got them all. And what I don't have, embarrassingly, what I don't have is all of that I don't have all of that for parenting. I am 5.5 years into this gig, first time round. And I have to say, I probably wasn't ready for it, even at the ripe old age of 54. But he's an indescribably clever boy. He's very empathetic. So he realizes when he's really pushing too many buttons at once, and he's kind enough to give you a break when you just haven't got your shit together, for want of a better phrase.
Yep. I love that. And I mean, something I forgot to mention is that you've actually lived and worked and run businesses in 8 different countries. So, I can imagine that everything you've just said about how you still feel that you aren't ready, you still feel like there's curveballs and there's nuances and there's new things you need to learn and understand and grapple with as a parent, even despite living in such a diversity of countries, running businesses in different kind of legislative frames and compliance requirements and all that right across different parts of the world. And yet it's still like there's no rule book, right? Is there? Like when you become a parent, you're like, holy, what's going on here? It's really like everything is a new uncharted adventure. And I've said this in the past that I personally found that so much of the education provided by people like midwives and birth experts is all about the lead up and the actual part of delivering the child. And there's about zero when it comes to what happens once you bring the child home, how you manage the relationship, how you manage still being a couple and trying to stay in love and still work in that sense. And then how do you manage all of the, like you say, the button pushing and the boundary testing that children throw at us as parents. So I understand now that you're no longer with your son's mum, you're no longer with your partner who you had your son with. Can you describe to me in as much or as little detail as you want, how was it just prior to having your son? And then what were some of the signs that things weren't quite working?
The biggest issue was intimacy, which I understood. There was a couple of things, and you touched on two things that I really did want to bring up, which was the midwifery and the whole process. We sadly went through an indescribably difficult and life-threatening delivery. His mother had something called HELP syndrome, which is it's a killer, and it's a very, very dramatic illness that you can have in childbirth. And one of the major triggers for it is very low blood pressure. Unfortunately, his mother naturally has low blood pressure. So they did not pick up, the midwives and the prenatal care didn't pick up on her low blood pressure. And the night Balthazar was born was a very, very dramatic experience. She was in intensive care for the next 4 days. And literally she would be breastfeeding and throwing up at the same time.
Oh my goodness.
And she had 5 or 6 cannulas hanging out of her most of those 4 days. And it was. So
it's not exactly the typical love-filled, gorgeous kind of experience of bringing a child into the world.
There was loads of love because I was scared to death for her. We were still together. This was our first child, and it was one of those moments where you never forget it, and it can't be darkened with the conversations that may have gone on subsequent to that, or the feelings that went on subsequent. That was just something where we pulled through together. However, the thing, and I want to mention it to warn other dads, particularly if they're just rolling into this and they've not quite made it to dad phase, but they've made a baby. And I'm very, very aware of mental health, and I've been through all sorts of cycles of dramatic mental health experiences that really weren't fun. But 5.5 years later, I can still remember the midwife turning around to me and dealing with me as if I was an unwanted accessory in the whole birthing process, in the postnatal care, when she's throwing up and trying to breastfeed, and we're dealing with him because he was rolling close to jaundice, and they were doing blood tests. At one stage, they took so much blood out of our baby that was 2 days old from his feet that they couldn't find anywhere to take the blood again for more blood tests. And even the matron turned around and said, they are going to have to work with what we've given them. I'm not even going to try anymore. So to the dads that are listening, or to the potential dads that are listening, you do have to get a bit of a thick skin, because the system still does not acknowledge. If you're bright enough to have tuned into this podcast, and if you're patient enough to put up with me rambling on, then God bless you. But just be prepared for the fact that there are some professionals out there that still are the female opposite of us cavemen when we're full-on cavemen swilling beer and wrestling bears.
Wow. Okay.
Sorry, that was my pulpit moment. You may get some more, but I hope
you're very welcome to preach. I invite guests on that have got interesting stories, and I'm really, really grateful, because I think the whole point of this is that no two stories are alike, really. There's common through lines that we can each relate to, but like, for example, my first child was born 7 weeks premature, so she spent 3 weeks in the neonatal intensive care and was like 4 pounds when she was born. She was this tiny little sparrow of a thing. So I completely get that sense of like, and in the moment, you don't even really think of all of the possibilities of shit going sideways, right? You're just literally like, oh, here's this child. What does she need? Let's give her what she needs. Let's, pull together as a couple. Like my parents and my wife's parents shared with us well after the fact. They're like, we were all standing around terrified. Like we had no idea whether your baby was going to survive or not, because she was so little and she was so early. And, so look, be that what it may, you deal with it and you take it on the chin. So I suppose in the wash up after all of that, in your experience, Thomas, is where things started to shift in the relationship with your ex, I'm imagining.
Yeah, initially we were both incredibly focused. And again, you touched on another thing. I swear to you, if we'd left that hospital the following morning with a baby, I don't know who would have broke first, the baby or us, because you are so utterly unprepared.
Yeah.
And we were reasonably well read, and we'd got family support, and we're both generally regarded as quite intelligent people. Not a Scooby what we were doing. 5 days later, having been around professionals doing all sorts with him, in terms of nappies and feeding, and just this is what you do. I mean, the classic was we went outside and we had this brand new, amazing car seat. I promise you, it was not fitted correctly. The baby was not strapped in correctly, but we made it home because we weren't involved in an accident. But in hindsight, it was just guardian angels having to work overtime.
Uh-huh. So again, I can relate to that too. I remember one night my wife was up breastfeeding our daughter, and being still so little, and my wife, the milk had come in, there was a fair bit of boob going around, and it seemed like they were having a bit of a battle between the two of them, my wife and our daughter, trying to work out how to feed and how to attach and all this. And I said, is she getting any milk? And my wife's like, I don't friggin' know. There's no lines on my boobs telling me how much has come out. It's all a great unknown.
Exactly. And again, I remember that it was, getting. There's so much attached, and I do feel sorry for women on this one, and obviously mothers, but I genuinely feel massively sorry for them, because there's so much pressure to, you've got to breastfeed. It's, you affect the child's development. And there's this long, absolute dictionary list or encyclopedic list of you've got to breastfeed. Well, do you know what? Yeah. There is no on-off switch. You've got to prime the bloody things, and you don't know how to do that. And then once you prime them, you don't know whether you're delivering or leaking. You don't know whether you've got the right gear going in them or whether it's the preamble. It's very, very tough. And your wife was bang on the money. I mean, honestly, there is no look in the glass and see if it's half full or half empty.
That's right.
And the worst of it is, of course, the babies don't care. They're chomping down going, I want food. And then next thing is, the poor mums are literally in some form of epidermal torture.
Yeah. It's, and these sorts of conversations at 2 a.m, when everyone's tired, no one's had the right amount of unbroken sleep, it does lead to certainly some tension. I can definitely remember there were some pretty dicey moments. I'm like, I might just tiptoe backwards out of the room here, because otherwise it's going to go Chernobyl and I'm going to end up with limbs missing, So moving on a bit, you and your ex sort of parted ways about when your son was around 2 or 3, I think, from memory, from when we
it was we had the conversation when he was around 2.5, and I remember where and the whens and the hows and the whys, and it really wasn't fun. But we agreed that it wasn't recoverable, for various reasons. I don't think we were no longer invested in recovering what we had. I had grown up, and this is not, God forbid if my mother listens to this, but if she does, so be it. But it's not a judgment call, but I did not grow up in a happy home. Part of that,
right,
with no doubt, will be that I'm not the black sheep. I am the originator of the black sheep. I'm the start of that gene pool. Now, fortunately, if we revert back to our Bible, and with a name like Israel, there must be some biblical reading gone on in your background. All the stories that I draw favour from are the ones that constantly talk about the fact that, unless you've sinned, you can't be holy, and it's easier to pass through the eye of a needle than it is to get into heaven. So, and I'm paraphrasing appallingly, but just quantifying myself for what my poor mother went through with me growing up. But what I did recognize was a working, separated parental arrangement was better by far, by my judgment, and I'm not calling anyone else out on this, but my judgment was that we were much better as two people that weren't trying to rip each other's faces off under two separate roofs than to be two people under one roof that just literally crackled and fizzled when we were around each other. And other parents
I've
at
heard
school
that
have commented
in a number of ways.
But let's also put this again. Let's put this in other people's context. Other parents at the school, on more than one occasion, when they first got to know us and subsequently, have commented on the fact that we're able to work together, and when we can go to birthday parties together when it's necessary. It's not something we look forward to or wish for, because we don't both need to go to a 5-year-old's birthday party, but if it calls for it, we do it, and we do it well. But it's not, we ain't ever getting back together. That contract is done and dusted. But there is a small person that's critical to that equation.
I have to say, just on that point you raised about, you are able to put whatever personal differences aside that you felt for the benefit of your son having both his parents at an event. I can talk to that in my own background. My parents divorced when I was about 7, or they separated when I was about 7 and divorced, however many legal months or years after that. I think it was probably 12 months after in Australia. You have to have a 1-year separation before you can get the paperwork signed. But I vividly recall from my childhood, every time my mum and dad were in the same place, and even hilariously, even the expression mum and dad is very foreign to me, because it's always been, they both remarried within 2 years of separating. There was, Dad and Sue, my stepmom, and Mum and Pete, my stepdad, so there was always that's the common phrase for me. But my mum and dad, whenever they were in the same place, it was always really uncomfortable. Neither of them handled it well. Neither of them were easily able to put aside that tension for my benefit or for my sister's benefit. And so I want to congratulate you, because I know firsthand what the other version of that story is like, where, your son, for example, sees both his parents in the one room and they're going at each other, arguing, or there's just like a tension so thick and palpable, you literally can feel it. So that is a huge credit to both of you to, I suppose, maturity to the point that you're able to separate out the two roles or the two relationships, the one that you used to have with each other or may continue to have with each other, and the one that you have with your son. So that's awesome.
It is.
What would you say? Go on.
Sorry, I'm glad you picked up on it, but it is important. It is, it's two people pulling that stunt off. It's not me on my own, and it's not her on her own. I feel for you for what you grew up with. And just again, to put some context in this, we talked earlier about my time in Denmark, just the culture there, the Scandinavian culture, is quite remarkable. My long-term girlfriend was obviously fully Danish, and all of her family, but at Christmas, we would have literally 4 Christmas days, because both parents had remarried at least once. And in fact, both of them had remarried once, and then one of them had gone on and had a partnership with someone that he wasn't married to. The dad had settled down with someone else. And so we had 4 levels of siblings that were half brothers, that weren't brothers or sisters, but they were through marriage. I don't even know what you call that. So like, brother-in-law, but not in marriage, or I don't know how it works, but it was like, and that was quite
it's
early
like
on.
Yours, mine, ours, and the other lot.
Yeah, well, that was in the early 90s. So again, that set my framework. I took influence from that. I never had an issue with the whole married, remarried, it's this one, it's that one. Look, as long as you're not at each other's throats, I'm happy to sit down and have a meal and have a drink, have a laugh, do what you want to do.
What
So
would you say on that? Like, what's the key thing that you've had to lean on there in your experience now with your son's mum at kind of managing that? Because I'm sure, I mean, it sounds like when you reached a point to have a mature and adult conversation about, look, this just isn't working, and like you said, it was one of the hardest conversations you've ever had to have. But to reach that point where you can have that conversation, like you said, there's been lots of crackle and fizzle and sort of tension between you leading up to that point. What have you drawn on personally to then be able to maintain that peaceful, civil kind of co-parenting relationship since the two of you parted ways?
Israel, you're putting a beautiful light on this. It was nothing like that. There was hot pins and various forms of self-flagellation to get through the pain points.
Right.
It was not that glamorous or simple. I mean, I'm 2 years out of cohabiting. I'm in my second round of rented accommodation, and I am just about mentally and emotionally prepared to think about having a date with someone. It was in fact, in answer to your question, I'll tell you what it was. It was a disconnection. That's the only way I can describe it. I disconnected from that part of my needs, and they didn't go away. I'm a tactile, loving guy who's probably much like most 35-year-olds when it comes to that side of me. You can park the age number for a bit, because I'm still full speed, mad, full of energy, and very much inclined to be with a woman and enjoy everything that you can do, share, laugh, tease, torment, and giggle about with a girl, with a lady.
Yeah. Right. So in a way, what you're saying, or what I'm hearing, is that what kind of helped you get through was, in a way, kind of to shut down some of the emotional stuff and just kind of almost not so much stuff it down, but just put it to one side, like you say, disconnect. And so that was kind of the coping mechanism, just to sort of switch that off and just go, okay, I can't let myself get into that and feel that. I just need to put that to the side for our son's benefit right now, and I'll come back to that when I've got the headspace or the time or the strength.
Very much. And
right.
And it was look, there was a couple of things I've done that have been transformational in terms of my personal development, and they've helped me process that stuff, because what happens is it comes in and it hits you. So dads, if you're paying attention and you're thinking, this is what I've got to do, my heartfelt advice is, it's critical that you are crystal clear on that decision. This is not a decision that you can keep revisiting. So you do need to get in there, peel that onion. Once you finished crying as you peeled the onion and you've got there and you're at the stage you're at where you want to make your decision, whatever way that is, you're going to have to get it by the throat and hold on to it. Whatever that decision is, keep it. And then you can deal with all the other stuff. But I definitely think you end up compartmentalizing it. The beauty is you've got someone to love. You've got that child to love,
right?
And that will help you, because love is omnipotent. It is the changer of everything, and it's brought giants to their knees, and it's raised midgets to giant stature.
Yeah.
And I mean that metaphorically, obviously. I'm not.
No, I get it. I mean, I'm my wife walked down the aisle to that song by the Beatles, "All You Need Is Love," and as sloganistic and as potentially trite as that whole saying and that lyric is, I also really wholeheartedly believe it. Right, like it really is, like you say, a very transformative emotion and experience, and it can heal anything. It can do anything. It's really, really cool. So I suppose, you've said that you had a very disconnected experience for the last couple of years, focusing your attention primarily on the love you feel for your son and everything that he needs to be his best, and for you to support him in whatever way you can. what are some of the things you've done to then dig into peeling the onion for yourself? I know we have one thing in common, which is the TCP program, but tell me more, like what sort of adventures did you go on through that time to start peeling the onion, as it were, and get back to what you need and who you are? And I imagine, even allow yourself to feel what you needed to feel.
I've always been a voracious reader. And since discovering audiobooks and podcasts, I've just been non-stop, and we'll go off in all sorts of directions. I've learned to appreciate going in directions that I wouldn't normally. And again, I'd recommend it. As you say, you mentioned TCP. That definitely, I never knew what the phrase woo-woo was. I'd always been spiritual and wasn't bothered by it. I grew up in a house where we had ghosts. The house was over 400 years old. The outside buildings were over 400 years old. Parts of them, they'd had a carving on there where a man was hung for stealing a sheep. And in that building were a couple of mechanics that worked on my dad's construction equipment. And I'll never forget the story where one of them was working there one day and he put a spanner down and he lost the spanner for 2 days. And he thought one of the other guys had been making fun, but no one else was working there. And then the spanner turned up on the other side of the machine 2 days later. So I'm very, very open to an esoteric sort of force and energy that occupies our space, and we don't always get to see it. And maybe that's partly the lyrical, mythical Paddy in me, and maybe it's just the fact that I grew up unfettered. No one ever said, well, you can't be that, and you mustn't do this. And I was very, very lucky, whilst it was a bizarre upbringing, because I really grew up in a business. I didn't grow up in a family. I grew up in a business. And my dad was always, always working. And my very first memory was before I could walk, was sitting in the back of my dad's car on a building site. And I reckon it was his first building site, his first job that he got within his own company, looking at the timeline. So in answer to your question, I'm sorry, I will go off topic painfully.
That's all right.
The meditation, and I know it's a big thing at the moment. Whenever you're listening to this, believe me, it will probably continue to grow and grow. But meditation keeps getting a lot of limelight, and rightly so. And I've probably, what am I now? I'm a year out of TCP, just over. And Jim talked about it a lot. I couldn't get to grips with it. Joe Dispenza, I absolutely love and take a great deal of information and growth from all the stuff that he shared. But for the life of me, if you had a gun to my head, I don't think I could do a Joe Dispenza meditation. It's just too complex. Naval Ravikant was a guy that I'm sure his book is called Love Yourself as If Your Life Depended on It. And if it's not, dash that up. You'll get there when you Google it. But, oh my God, a beautiful
amazing book.
Yeah, beautiful book. And again, I think it's one of the ones Jim recommended. There's another one that was recommended to do with love, that's by a lady, and it's a course. I think it's actually, the book is actually presenting it as a course. And again, this power of love is omnipotent, and it will get you through your darkest times when you can connect with love. And I've even played games with it. There's been people that through work I've been exposed to that I would quite happily crush under a lorry. They're of no benefit to the planet. Maybe I haven't made myself clear on my feelings. I'm sorry, Israel. I can be more specific.
I really wish you'd open up some more. Really we could get into the real feelings, yeah.
I'm really sorry about holding back, but it's important. But then I've reframed, and I mention this for a very important reason, because Dad, I did say to you, it really wasn't as idyllic as you've put across that I've managed to deal with my breakup, and my ex-wife's managed to deal with the breakup. But the way you will deal with it is connect with your love. Connect with your love for yourself, because it's the same love you have for your child. It's exactly the same. For your pet, whatever it is in your life, your parents, connect with that love, and it will bring you through. And the tools, the meditation, the reading, the messages you'll get from the books you pick up, they'll all help you. But the reality is, if you want the one superpower, it's that love connectivity, and it's a thing that the greatest minds I've read and listened to and heard is between the brain and the heart. You get those two working together, and your brain will acquiesce to the power of your heart, and your heart is divine.
Yeah.
That connectivity is divinity.
I think we can just drop the mic right there. That, honestly, like everything I've reflected on and learned and grown from. I first read that Kamal Ravikant book, Love Yourself Like Your Life Depends on It. I think the first time I read that was around 2013. And it was a much shorter volume than what it is now, because he has added, I think he got a publishing gig, and, you know, they ended up adding a whole bunch more stories and exercises and things to the book. So it's now, you know, a regular kind of couple of 100-page novel. But the first version was like a half hour, 45-minute read. And I remember sitting there and just going, oh my God, this is profound. And it was literally that simplicity of, I love myself. I love myself. I love myself, over and over again. When I was at the bottom end of my first really intense depression period after my son was born, that was one of the things that helped me rediscover a sense of love for me. But then, you know, ebbs and flows, and it starts to drift away. But then after, you know, discovering Jim and the TCP course and a variety of extra things around that, including gratitude meditation and other things myself, that self-love piece has become the single piece, because I've discovered exactly what you're saying, the transformational power of love, especially when we apply it to ourselves. Because when we give ourselves the joy and the courtesy and the compassion of loving us just as we are, it is like a superpower. I've found that in every aspect of my life, if I love who I am, where I am, as I am, no judgment, no conditional, no searching for external validation and achievement, then I can bloody move mountains. And it makes sense to me perfectly that everything you've described, that has been the one kind of guiding light that has helped you get through the challenges that you've had. And I don't know if it's the British in you, or if it's just your personality, or some combination of that plus the very diverse life and experience you've lived. But you do have a knack of just, you know, painting with these beautiful broad brushstrokes about what I'm sure has been a very difficult journey. But adding, and like you say, maybe it's the Irish in you, that the humor that comes through does soften the edges of just what it is that you've been through and dealt with. And so I kind of want to acknowledge that, but at the same time, completely agree that love is, in my experience personally, in your experience personally, it's the peace that we all need to return to. And that's the hub of how I work now with my clients and with how I live in my life.
And it's interesting you bring up the client aspect. It's and I didn't finish the story, and it is so important because it helps me process moments. It helps me process moments with other people. But literally, this one guy I'm thinking of was he was a diabolical person to work around, work with, work under. And I had one day where I'd been listening to Naval, or I'd been doing a gratitude meditation, but something had triggered me that day, and I just went, I'm not accepting that I'm going to get upset about this guy. I'm just not accepting it. I'm going to send him love. And I know this is going to sound woo-woo and crazy, but we both know it works. And I just sent him some love. Yep. And it was just ridiculous, the difference I experienced in that one day. Literally 20 minutes later, I was in front of him, and it's important now because it's still a challenge. The mother of my child is still the person that I am no longer married to, with many rational decisions to support that position, both from her perspective and from mine. Which means there's got to be times when she probably isn't feeling like getting me some chocolates, tucking me in bed, or giving me a back rub. And I acknowledge that. But even her energy when she's not in the best of places, you kick into that love moment, that superpower, and it levels both of you off, and they don't even know you're doing it. Whether that be
Yeah.
a bullying bastard at a job, or whether it be the mother of your child who you really don't think it's fair to knock her block off, so you mustn't, and you go into that love mode, and it will bring you through with an S on your chest.
Yeah. 100%. It's so good. I love that and I have to say, I didn't expect the conversation would land here, but I'm so glad that it did, because, again, as you and I have learned as we've gone through the various journeys with Jim Thornton, with Joe Dispenza, there's the whole quantum realm, there's the energy field that we all exist in and occupy, and I suppose there's that the mirror of the universe. Whatever you put out is what you get back. And so if you're putting out negativity and hate and frustration and anger, just watch. All the circumstances in your life will line up and generate more of that for you. But when you do switch that around and go, okay, let's bring some gratitude to this moment. How can I be thankful for the circumstances I'm currently in and the abundance that I experience, even if I've got a mountain of debt, even if I'm sleeping on a mattress in the back of my car? How can I be
You had a
thankful?
mattress?
How can I send Yeah, we were in the top A1 of the people sleeping in the back of the car. No, you know what I mean, though, right?
Oh my God, yeah.
That whole when you shift it in yourself, what's the saying? I've heard it described like the reticular activated system. You buy a car and then suddenly you see 8,000 of the same bloody car on the road.
Yeah.
I didn't see any of those before I bought this car.
Exactly. The reticular activated system is part of it. But you know the science behind that, don't you?
Tell me, and our listeners.
Sorry, say again. I missed that.
I said, please tell me and our listeners.
It's been, and I don't know how they measure these things, but it is absolutely outstanding that they can and they do. So, and forgive my bastardization of the numbers, but if you imagine that per second we have something like 7 trillion bits of information coming into a muscle in our body that we still at most use 10% of. That brain, that muscle, will chuck away everything barring about 2,500 bits of data. But when it chucks it away, it doesn't chuck it away. It goes in, it's in there, and all that data is sitting somewhere, but because it hasn't been consciously stored, it requires our higher selves to find it. But our higher selves have certain trigger points. So, for example, we're just sitting in our red Ford, and we love our red Ford. And because we love our red Ford, the brain's gone, shit, he loves this red Ford. Look, there's another one. Let's make him happy. So it will let you see the red Ford. And what is so spooky, because this was going through my brain. I think it's because I wanted to do a post on LinkedIn. I do quite a lot of posting on LinkedIn at the moment. It may not be the same in the future. And one of the oldest training videos going, and I'm saying oldest because I've been in sales for almost 40 years in one way or another. And this was kicking around back in the day. Bear with me. This was kicking around back in the day, but it was basically 2 groups of basketball players. One was wearing a yellow bib top, and the other one's wearing a red bib top. And then you're asked to look for the guy in the blue bib top. Now, I don't really want to spoil the story. Do you think I should or not? Because you're nodding your head. I think you know this one. So
I've heard something, I think, on a similar tangent.
So your focus is like you're in there, you're in this training course, and the trainer stood up there and he's playing the cocky trainer because he knows he's going to catch you out. And everyone in the room is the cleverest, brightest boys and girls in the room are looking. And no one found the blue bib top. But they also didn't see the man dressed in a 7-foot gorilla suit walk through the middle of the viewing. Because your brain wasn't told to look for the 7-foot gorilla. So it didn't tell you that it'd seen it. Your brain had seen it, but it didn't tell you that it'd seen it. So there is your
Right.
there's a better way of describing your reticular activated system.
And so drawing on that, when we start to focus our attention on love and on kindness and on gratitude and on compassion and, acknowledging, I suppose, what is really the truth, that we're all just doing our best. And honestly, sometimes our best is pretty shit, but still we're doing our best. We're not actively trying to be assholes, and we're not necessarily, unless we're sociopaths, in which case you're probably not listening to this anyway. But, we're all actively trying to do our best. So if we take that lens and apply it to everybody else in our life and in our network, and we go, my ex-wife, she's just doing her best. That guy that I want to crush under a lorry, he's just doing his best. And when we bring that kindness and compassion to those people and to the circumstances of our lives, you're right. That part of our brain looks for more of the same, because that's what we're putting our attention on. And so suddenly, what was originally a very cloudy, stormy day filled with torment and negativity, like you said, in that one day, you switched the whole narrative with this guy by focusing on sending him a bit of love. And then suddenly the way he showed up and the way you interacted, everything shifted. And it might not be, instantly you're going to go out and watch a game together and drink beers and be best pals, but it can certainly make enough of a difference that it's tangible and acknowledged, and it just makes the life of day a little bit more pleasant.
You've hit on a very important point. Everyone is trying to do their very best, and they can only work. I mean, I've been blessed. I am jealous. I'm jealous of, there's some people I know that have spent 25, 30 years in the same job in a similar environment, never moved, and they've had a splendid life. Me, whether it's a blessing or a curse, I've ended up in 8 different countries as a business person or a worker or business owner. That is a double-edged sword. So it does give me the perspective to go, that guy over there whose mum was part-time alcoholic, part-time junkie, whose dad was perpetually in and out of jail for absolute BS, but just couldn't help himself. He'd be in a stolen car, or he'd have a fight, or he just kept a number of policemen in a job because of his circumstances. They're not bad people. They're just in a cycle that won't get them past it. And there's 2 points I really want to touch on, because you've triggered it now. Sorry, Israel, but it's your fault.
Strap in, kids.
Yeah, I'm afraid so. Because I catch myself quite often. It is genuinely challenging doing as good a job as you can humanly do with a 5.5-year-old in my circumstances. And there are times when I am definitely not the father or the adult that I want to be or that he deserves. But I catch myself. I catch myself, and I have a very, very fast and hard chat about, come back to love, come back to calmness. Why are you shouting at him? Why are you being short-tempered? Why are you demanding things of him? The kid's just come home from school. He's been running around all day long, and you can genuinely see that he's pretty much on reserve energy and ready for bath and bed.
Yeah.
So, and whatever that is, whenever they're pushing your buttons, and that could be when they're 20. I'm not convinced I don't still push my mum's buttons, but we work through that as best we can, and I make sure I'm sending out the love, so that at least if I'm pushing them, I'm doing it with a feathered touch as opposed to the punch that I used to give to the buttons.
Yeah. Look, I think we are at a great point to wrap things up. And I think I'm going to preempt this here. So I normally wrap up these chats with the question of what would be the one single thing you would suggest to help dads thrive and to help be their best. And I'm guessing it's going to be something along the tangent of really discover how to connect to your own love for yourself and how to bring that into your life. But I would love to hear if you have any other different flavor on that or anything else you want to add.
The only thing I'd say is from personal experience. I have I've had diabolical internal dialogue with myself over failings I've had in my careers, failings I've had as a father, as a husband. And the reality now is coming full circle, as much as you can come full circle, because it never closes, or it shouldn't do. I do think it's very important that the other side of that coin of love is that you're kind to yourself. You know, yes, you can tell yourself off, but don't brutalize yourself. There's no need.
Love it. Love it. Look, I'm going to wrap it there. I think that's a beautiful way to wrap it. Thank you so much, Thomas, for your time, for your candor, and for sharing your experiences in such a joyful way, despite the fact that some of them have been fairly taxing and fairly challenging. And I'm sure that everyone who's listened to this will agree that this has just been a beautiful insight into, you know, sometimes life doesn't turn out the way we think it's going to. You know, things have separated. You've had children quite late in life. However, you've still managed to find some things to make it a beautiful experience for you and give your son everything he needs to be his best, and work together with your ex so that you can be the parents he deserves. And I just think it's amazing. So I'm so grateful for the chat. Thank you very, very much for being here.
My deep pleasure. Thank you, Israel, for the invitation and the chance.
All right, everyone. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you next episode. Thanks so much for joining me on this most recent episode of Dad's Guide to Thrive as part of the Illuminating Lives podcast. I really appreciate you being here, and I would really appreciate if you resonated with this interview, if you wouldn't mind sharing it with the people in your life. Help spread this message, spread these conversations to dads, men, and women everywhere so that we can all be better. Write a comment, hit the like button, subscribe if you want to get notified for the next episode. And please remember that I'm a one-to-one coach and a professional speaker, helping dads in business feel more peace, be more at ease, and feel less stress and be better able to be the parent, husband, and leader in their lives that they want to be. So if you'd like to work with me or have me present to your organization, please contact me via my website or social media channels. The details are all in the description. I look forward to seeing you on the next episode. And in the meantime, may you be happy, may you be healthy, may you be loved, and may you live with ease.